Well, good morning everyone, and thank you so much for turning out. Not a bad day today. It's better than perhaps the weather forecast has been predicted. Just to confirm again, my name is Kenneth Bannerman. I'm the Director General, the founder and head of the Airfields of Britain Conservation Trust, or as we also call it by its initials, ABCT. We are essentially the world's first national airfield charity. We formed in 2006 and we're primarily based in Glasgow, where I live. Now, just before I give the usual history of Millom Airfield and why this matters at a bigger picture level, first of all, I'll hand over to Mr. Richard Outram, who is the gentleman you've got to thank in many respects, because he was the one who actually requested one of our memorials. So I'll hand you over now to Richard.
Okay. Thank you. Good morning everybody, good morning ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for coming to join us today on this very special occasion. Before I actually say anything, can I just first of all give apologies from a number of people. The Lord Lieutenant of Cumbria, the local MP Michelle Scrogham were unable to join us today, and also unable to join us was the station commander from RAF Spade Adam, which is the nearest operational RAF base to this location. But they all sent apologies, and they did send us their best wishes for the success of this event. So I thought I'd start by mentioning that. I'm Richard Outram. I'm the Secretary of the UK and Ireland Nuclear Free Local Authorities and something called the Mayors for Peace chapter. The reason I'm telling you that is I'll relate that to what I say in a few moments, because it is very relevant. But let me start with a dramatic announcement. You are standing on the target site for an atomic bomb. That's got your attention, hasn't it? As it did the British Army and RAF personnel who at the start of the Cold War arrived at RAF Millom in gritty anticipation of some testing training in a place called Doomtown, for that is what RAF Millom became. For the curious amongst you, a short video can be found on YouTube under the title Doomtown, aka Downtown, and it's from 1955, and it's a Pathé newsreel. It's very interesting to watch. The newsreel opens with a description of Doomtown. It's described as a desert of wrecked houses on the Cumbrian coast, where men battle grimly against fire and smoke, where rescue squads check each other for radioactivity, the deadly aftermath of an atomic bomb. This is what nuclear war means. The disused RAF Millom became Britain's biggest mobile defence training centre, as it's described in that video. A make-believe town destroyed by an atomic bomb, where bloodied, bruised and broken make-believe casualties could be found amongst the rubble by service personnel being trained how to evacuate and treat them with great care. And thereafter, it being England, apologies, the casualties and their rescuers were then treated to tea and cake at the NAFI. That's how many thousands of national servicemen spent their final month in training, learning rescue methods in the atomic age. RAF Millom was of course the right place to bring them, for it was the home of modern mountain rescue methods first developed during the Second World War. Methods then readily transferred to the rigours of Doomtown. But I'm going to leave that to Ken to tell you more about, as he will tell you more about RAF Millom as a military base. Suffice it to say, given my job titles, my professional interest on discovering Millom had been Doomtown was piqued, and I guess that's all brought us here today. For it was in my professional capacity working as Secretary for the UK and Ireland Nuclear Free Local Authorities that I first began researching the history of RAF Millom, when this site was at the start of 2025 designated an area of focus by an organisation called Nuclear Waste Services, which is charged with finding a location for a repository to hold Britain's legacy and future radioactive waste. This area of focus will be subject to many investigations, as to its suitability, but my focus was upon the operational history of RAF Millom and the legacy of this airbase. And I learned about the courage of the brave men and women, many who were from other nations like Poland and the United States, who came here to learn to fly, and tragically to sometimes perish in terrible accidents amongst the challenging terrain and the sometimes treacherous weather we find in Cumbria. And I thought perhaps there was a way of marking their service and their sacrifice. So this brought me into contact with the sterling work done by former Haverick prison officer John Nixon, who as an author documented the history of RAF Millom and many of the other air bases in Cumbria, and who established an air museum and a first memorial on this site. And that memorial is just through the gates there on the left. Very sadly, John died recently, but I'd like to pay tribute to him as a pioneer and to express how grateful and delighted I am that we're joined today by members of John's family. My research also brought me into contact with Kenneth Bannerman and the Airfields of Britain Conservation Trust, and the incredible work that he and the Trust do to mark the service and sacrifice of our past servicemen and women throughout the land. Kenneth's immediate can-do enthusiasm, and that was absolutely evident from the very first phone call that we had, coupled with the ready support and aid of the staff of HMP Haverick, have made all this possible, and for this I thank them. And so here we are. Let us spend a moment to reflect on what this splendid memorial means, for it will be a fitting epitaph, and I'm confident that in the decades to come it will serve as a fitting reminder that in this place, when Britain was engulfed by a monstrous evil and Britain was in its greatest peril, that many thousands of men and women came to serve selfishly, came here to serve selflessly their country, their king and the cause of freedom. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Richard. That was an excellent and most interesting speech. Really good. Right, well, as regards the history of Millom Airfield, it first opened in January 1941. Like Cark, at a very basic level, it was very initially regarded as perhaps being a fighter airfield, but then with the way World War II was going, times and policies changed. Incidentally, we carry out very deep level research into Britain's airfields, and for example, this is maybe not quite so well known, but had the Battle of Britain taken a turn for the worse round about September, October 1940, the Central Gunnery School at legendary Dorset Airfield, Wormwold, where we unveiled a similar memorial a few years ago now, would have been evacuated here, although the airfield wasn't quite ready. Apparently the runways were ready for use, but none of really of the buildings or other facilities. So why I say that was that when Millom finally opened in January 1941, the staff here had a pretty tough time of it initially. There were hardly any buildings available, mattresses weren't available, all sorts of things. So with the greatest of efforts, they still managed to get flying training fully going by the end of the following February. So the main unit that was based here was initially called Number 2 Bombing and Gunnery School, which after a couple of changes of name became perhaps best known as Number 2 Observers Advanced Flying Unit, or OAFU for short. Flying equipment initially consisted of two types. There was the Fairey Battle light bomber, which had taken an absolute hammering in France when the Germans invaded, but it then became a very good training aircraft. Sadly though, the other aircraft that was mainly here in the earlier days of Millom's life was a thankfully now somewhat forgotten airfield called the Blackburn Botha, which was a maritime patrol bomber, and it then became a training aircraft. It was unfortunately one of the worst aircraft the RAF ever had. Really dangerous aircraft. However, thankfully, with further flying training development, by 1943, the main aircraft based here was one of Britain's greatest ever and best loved types, the Avro Anson, or the Annie, as so many people in the RAF called it. Great aircraft. So the AFU carried out tremendous service in assisting the war effort until the first few days of January 1945, when the unit disbanded. There were other flying units here as well for anti-aircraft cooperation, and there was also some Fleet Air Arm Squadron involvement too. So after the AFU disbanded, there was further use of this RAF station. There was notably an Aircrew Holding Unit, or ACHU, that was here in the second half of 1945, very important as well. And this actually dealt with Australian aircrew. So Millom Benny Standers played a very big part in the winning of World War II. It maybe didn't have perhaps the best of weather records, but having said that, it proved very successful, and it also, because of its general location, also proved a very useful haven for lost aircraft. Eventually in September 1946, Millom closed for the first time when it was passed to the War Office or War Department, and there was Polish involvement, as also happened at Cork after World War II. However, the airfield then reopened in the early 1950s, and there was a lot of expenditure made to revive this airfield, and it was a mixture of holding an officer cadet training unit, or OCTU, and also a trade school to do with engineering. However, policies, like in the early days, again chopped and changed, and despite, as was initially thought, Millom would have another long life, as it did in World War II, it was then decided to somewhat prematurely close here, and notably the OCTU moved to famous Isle of Man airfield Durby, where incidentally we've got a memorial there as well. We did that 10 years ago. So after care and maintenance rundown period, Millom then closed in an RAF come airfield capacity for the final time at the start of December 1954, when it passed to the Ministry of Works. So thereafter, with the excellent history that Richard has given, it was involved in army use of a more specialised nature for some years. And then what is now HM Prison Havering came into being in 1967, and then not forgetting, of course, the wind farm. So just to finish off before we unveil the memorial, as we say in our travels, please just do all you reasonably can to help save and honour Britain's airfields, active and disused, and of course not forgetting all the tremendously brave and dedicated people who have served at them, and in turn as well not forgetting their families. And as I say, Millom, not least the town, is a classic example, because it goes without saying the prison here is one of the town's biggest employers. So this place really, really matters in so many levels. So just point to perhaps remember is that by helping places like Millom and the airfield and prison general area, you're really helping yourselves as well. It's that relatively simple. So again, as I say, just please do all you reasonably can to help this airfield and everything concerned there. And therefore, again, thank you so much for attending. And now, family as well.
Yes. The Nixon family to come forward
yeah, sure.
to join us in unveiling.
So, yes, that's very welcome. So, we're all extremely delighted and honoured to be unveiling this latest memorial, like we did yesterday at Cark. We've now unveiled nearly 250 memorials alone. We're going as fast as we can with this project, along with everything else we do. In this case, to yet another of our truly priceless assets in this country, the one and only Millom Airfield. Thank you all very much. Yeah, just grab a corner. I'll grab it if you want. Yeah.